Okay, good afternoon and welcome. Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor James Wright, Chair of the Scrutiny Committee, and I'll be chairing the meeting. To begin, a few matters of housekeeping. In the event of an emergency, there are no practice alarms planned for this meeting, so if an alarm does sound, please evacuate City Hall by going down the main staircase and out to the War Memorial in front of City Hall. Toilets are either side of the Council chamber. Would speakers please use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone. Please mute the microphones when not speaking. The meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. Members of the committee and officers will introduce themselves, starting from my left and going around the room.
Councillor Lucy Galvin.
Councillor Gary Champion.
Councillor Ian Stuteley.
Councillor Hannah Höchner.
Councillor Richard Laws.
Councillor Sue Sands.
Councillor Mike Sands.
Councillor Kate Oliver.
Amy Nagel, Graduate Management Trainee.
Charlotte McAllister, Housing Partnerships Officer.
Chris Hasted, Housing Options Manager.
Andrew Turnbull, Development Strategy Manager.
Councillor Beth Jones, Cabinet Member for Housing.
Davina Howes, Executive Director, Housing and Communities.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Manager.
Thank you. And we have apologies from Councillor Smith and no substitute. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations they need to make for items on the agenda today? Councillor Stuteley.
I don't think it's necessarily interest, but I should probably mention that I was a non-executive director of Lion Homes, which has some relevance to one of our reports.
Okay, thank you. So any others? No. Item 3, minutes. The public and exempt minutes of the meeting held on 18th December 2025 are before the committee for confirmation. Are there any points of accuracy that need to be raised? No, in which case I'll propose those. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Laws, I think, was there first. Thank you. So we'll now put those to the vote. All those in favour of those, please indicate. They are carried unanimously. Thank you very much. So we're going to have a quick item 3A, which isn't on the agenda, but Councillor Galvin attended a meeting of HOSC today and will just update us on that. So over to you, Councillor Galvin. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give a verbal update and then send some notes in as well, so we'll have this. There were 4 items really of interest, or these were the 4 items at HOSC this morning, which I think are of interest to everyone. The first was Eastern Pathology Alliance weekend pathology testing. So that's testing over weekends. Actually, East Norfolk Medical Practice came and addressed the committee about the decision to stop weekend pathology testing, and the ICB actually explained that its equalities impact assessment hadn't been good enough, so hadn't identified the problems around stopping that service of weekend pathology testing. So it was quite interesting. That's going to come back to the committee, I think. And we're also writing to Graham Plant, the committee, to ask him to give a report on bus transport to hospitals, public transport, which was a good outcome from that item. There is more, and I'll put a bit more in a written report, but I won't give a full rundown on what happened with that one. The second item of interest was all age palliative and end of life care, which the ICB have done a large review on, and they say that Marie Curie, the charity, did a big review for them as well. If you want to look at the report and minutes, it's really interesting. They they've identified that provision's really inconsistent and inequitable as well across Norfolk, and people want to be at home and can't be. And they're running place-based workshops for a new model of care, and user groups are being invited to contribute to that really important piece of work, which is a completely new way of commissioning and a new service spec. It's going to take about 2 years, but will really improve and standardise end-of-life care. And there's lots of work going on training for providers of palliative care. So it was a very interesting topic, and I think it will come back. We'll find out more about it. At the moment, they spend £32 million, well over nearly £33 million on palliative care. And there are marked differences across the county, but a quarter of people felt they were not getting a good service. So it's a really important area. They want to have it as a flagship area. They don't want to spend less money on it. They want to sort of spend that money in a more effective way, and that's what they told the committee today, and we had lots of questions on that. The second to last item was Norfolk Medicine Support Service, which is a service they want to stop, which is a medicine service that people access when they're not able. Some patients can't manage their own meds as they've got conditions that prevent that. For instance, if they're forgetful or they're mentally ill, or maybe they can't read or write enough to manage medications. There's a service that helps people with that now, but they're actually stopping it. So they're going to cancel that, the ICB, because the county has pulled funding. So we've asked to go back to the county to ask why they pulled funding, and actually the committee did take issue with the fact that it was just being stopped, that service. Although it was said in the report it was a kind of out of date service, etc. They wanted to just stop it, but I think what will happen is that we will follow up with that and get a bit more information about the impact of stopping it, because obviously it could be people will end up in hospital a lot more if they don't get that support with how to take their different medications. And the last thing to say is the forward work programme. There's a lot going on at HOSC right through till March 27. The thing that's coming up that affects Norwich is a strategic review of outreach services as a pre-scrutiny item, which we will look at the Wellness on Wheels bus, and we've got the capacity to submit questions in advance on that. So if anyone is concerned at all about outreach services in Norwich, then get in touch with me and we can put some questions in. And then the last one, probably of the most concern of all of it, was the contracts recently let by the ICB. There's a lot of questions around the 2 new services for the walk-in centre and the vulnerable adult service that were let, or notice was given on them just before Christmas, although they are still in some kind of initial phase of procurement. They are on the government website as let. So we were made aware today that those contracts are actually being called in to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, and HOSC will have a role as part of that service. We're not sure who's called them in, and the Secretary of State does have complete discretion on what they say about them, but there are a whole range of issues around who those contracts have been awarded to. As we know, Norwich's walk-in centre and the vulnerable adult service are lifelines for thousands of people in the city and beyond, for people that can't get a GP appointment, to the most vulnerable in the community. They've been saved a couple of times in the past few years from being closed, and the provider went bust of One Norwich, and the community interest company took it over and has run it very successfully since, and then it was re-tendered. They haven't got the tender, but two private companies have external to Norfolk, both of which substantial concerns were raised about today in the HOSC meeting. So a range of questions have gone to Ed Garrett of the ICB, and he has given responses, but I think it's really important that we carry on pursuing that, and the members of HOSC were very keen to find out how the ICB are going to find out how they let those contracts, how they're going to ensure that the services are well run, how they'll ensure that the services work across both, because the same provider used to provide both. So the model had changed to people being registered across both, and now different providers are running each one. So we need to understand how that will work. So how they guarantee continuity of care. Now there's two different ones, and there are a whole range of problems that I hesitate to go into because it's just online information, but there does look like quite significant, at least questions around the named providers have been raised. So I'll leave it there, but if anyone wants to find out more about that, they can listen back to the meeting or talk to me. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that that update. Does anyone have any questions on that now, or okay? No, great, thanks very much. Right, in which case we'll now move on to the first of the substantive items for today, which is revisions to the home options policy. Chris Haston, I know, is standing by and ready to outline the report. Councillor Jones, did you want to say anything at this stage?
Thank you, and just thank you for the opportunity for us to bring this to scrutiny. It's been through consultation. It's, I think, very understandable changes. We have significant demands on the service, and I think this is quite sensible revisions that I'm personally, as cabinet member, quite keen to bring forward. But look forward to scrutiny's views on it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Chris, over to you, please, if you would. Thank you.
So we came to scrutiny last year, if anyone remembers, to discuss home options and the home options policy. Since then, we've done an all-councillor briefing on the subject and held a consultation in advance of our proposed changes to policy. Most of these changes are due to legislation and statutory guidance that we need to follow. So we're just bringing things up to date. Happens normally about every 5 years. So we're a little bit behind on some of the new government guidance. We need to now bring our policy up to date. There's nothing too major or controversial in these proposals. They're outlined in sections 7 to 11. I'm happy to sort of run through them and take any questions. So at the moment, when somebody rings in, we try to have a realistic conversation with the client about their chances of being successful. It's just a lean way of working, and we're just trying to be efficient and give people a realistic perspective on their chances of being successful in getting social housing. That's not in policy at the moment, but because it does get queried, sometimes it's useful for us to put that into policy. Local connection criteria, the government has changed the statutory guidance. At the moment, you need to be in Norwich for 6 months to qualify for the register and 2 years to go into a priority band. It's kind of confusing for people. It's confusing for us to administer, and it's contrary to the statutory guidance. It's also lagging behind the other authorities around us and other flow cities that are similar to us, who've all stretched their local connection criteria out recently. So to bring us in line, the government proposes minimum of 2 years local connection. We're going to go with a minimum 2 years local connection. That's the proposal. That will not apply to certain groups that the government sets out. Their armed forces, veterans, care leavers and domestic abuse victims. At the moment, you can refuse 5 offers of properties. We want to bring that down into 3, just to save everybody's time really as well. And again, social housing in Norwich is an extremely high demand. We need to be realistic with clients. 5 doesn't work for us. We also need to bear in mind we've got 14 housing associations that pay us to run this scheme and provide them with clients in housing need. A lot of them aren't based locally, so if there's a property view and they need to bring somebody in from Suffolk or Essex or somewhere, the client doesn't show up or refuses it because they don't like the bathroom suite colour, the housing association is getting kind of annoyed with us. So we need to listen to them as well, and we need to keep taking be mindful because they are paying us for this service. So that's the proposal we've got from them as well. So it's just about being realistic. We're happy with that one. Number 10 is just clarification of banding for rough sleepers and how that will come about. At the moment, there's no specific policy setting out how we treat rough sleepers in terms of banding. So what we're going to do is just codify that really, and we've used the latest government guidance, which came out in November, to set out how we'll achieve that. And the final one is in regard to the Armed Forces Covenant. If we have a number of clients in the same band, We have an armed forces flag on applications, and the client who's been in the armed forces will rise to the top only within the band. That doesn't mean the client will rise through the bands. So I'll give you an example. If we've got 15 applicants all in silver band, then the client who's got the armed forces flag will rise to the top regardless of effective date. That's new, but it is in accordance with the Armed Forces Covenant that says we need to give extra advantage to former members of the armed forces. There are the changes. This policy, these proposals have been subject to a consultation which had 72 responses. The responses, or a summary of the responses, are attached in the appendices. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I asked Chris about those 72 responses earlier on, about whether that was felt to be a good or a sort of poor response, and apparently that's significantly higher than it has been in previous years, where we're only at single digits. So clearly something is working better than it did. I'll open this up to questions from members. Councillor Sands, no doubt you will be particularly pleased with what's being shown in paragraph 11 there.
Yes, paragraph 11, and also.
You can use your mic if you're not. Yeah.
And also paragraph 19.
Yeah.
That was very pleasing.
Yeah. Thank you. Yes, Councillor Oliver, I think. Yeah. Please, next.
An extra button by mistake. Anyway, thank you. That was really interesting to hear. I was wondering about the special circumstances, for example, people fleeing domestic violence and people who are ex-armed services. Does that kind of mitigate against the 2-year, my last one, the 2-year continuously resident? Is that meant to kind of mitigate against that disadvantage that people would have if they're fleeing domestic violence or if they've been in the armed forces like elsewhere in the country?
Yeah, absolutely. So normally it's just to qualify, you'd need to be living in Norwich for 2 years, and it does. So that says those clients don't need to live in Norwich for 2 years. They can go straight onto the register.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Herkner next, and then Councillor Laws.
Thank you. My first question is about homeless people that they're expected to accept. And I was just wondering what the availability of council homes is that accept pets, because I imagine there would be many homeless people who wouldn't want to move anywhere where they can't take the dog or whatever accompanying animal they have. I have a few other questions, but I'm happy to put them at the end of the queue.
Yeah, we'll rotate through them, I think. Yeah.
In terms of council accommodation, to the best of my knowledge, the only properties that we can't accept pets in, large pets, are the tower blocks. There are also some block sheltered schemes that won't accept pets. For people who are rough sleeping, there's normally a step where you'd go into a hostel first and then move through the system so that you're prepared to move through into social housing. We also have housing first as well, which is where rough sleepers kind of leapfrog the hostel system and go into properties that we provide under the housing first system, and we would allow pets in those properties. So we do all we can. There are some landlords may have different rules. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Laws, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the presentation. It's very interesting. I noticed also the summary of the consultation responses are very clearly set out, and there seems to be pretty clear, if not overwhelming, support for all the changes. Being a relatively new councillor, I think I can still play that card, and not for much longer. This is the first time I really looked at the housing options policy in depth. I've got a question which is not related to the changes, but on its 2.3.3 of the policy. It's on page 22 in the agenda papers under the heading "The Applicant's Household," and I wasn't quite sure of the meaning of one of the bullets under that. It says the council will not consider the following as members of an applicant's household. And the third bullet is relatives who do not form part of the applicant's immediate family, where there's no formal care arrangement. Then it is a semicolon, and it lists parents or step-parents, grandparents, brothers, and so on, which seem to me to be immediate family. So I'm not quite sure whether they're included or excluded or quite what the meaning of the actual clause is. Thank you.
They are excluded. Immediate family would normally be the nuclear family. What we can't allow for, because demand is so high, we need to prioritise where somebody who's got, I don't know, extended family members in another part of the country, and they want to join the household, and then the household will say, well, I need a 6-bedroom house now because my family is joining me. We can't allow that. We've got very few properties to allocate, and we need to prioritise the households on the register. So we just need to make sure that we caveat the policy to say that if you're going to be joined by people who aren't members of your immediate family, we're not going to include them as part of your household when we're assessing housing need or the size of property that you are able to bid for.
Councillor Jones.
To follow on from what Chris has said, and I was going to mention about the numbers we have, but particularly we're always trying to look to free up the larger properties and working with people to downsize where appropriate. So we've got to be, you know, there are lots of ideal worlds, and I get a lot of queries about people saying we're over, we just don't have enough space. We've got X number of children in not enough bedrooms, things like that. And there is an ideal that we would want, but that need for larger properties is significant. So we do have to be really, really strict. And it's, you know, there are ideals that people might want in a perfect world, but actually we've got to meet the needs of the most vulnerable. So it's making sure people who really need that housing can have it, and we're meeting that immediate need. And I think we've got to be very realistic about what we can provide when we've got the number of people we have on the housing register.
Thanks. Because to say, yeah, so I'm not sort of questioning the policy. I just wanted to establish the meaning. So in basically, it's husband or wife or civil partner and son or daughter. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Sands.
Thank you, Chair. Just returning to the question of people with pets being put into emergency accommodation which may not accept pets. Is any thought being given to contacting one of the animal welfare agencies to foster the pet until such time as a person can be housed with their pet?
Well, I've got good news on that score. Yeah, we do have an arrangement with, I think it's called Dogs Trust at Snet. I think they're at Snetterton. And we have got an arrangement with them for pet fostering, and we're looking to develop that. We've got a pretty good relationship with them, so we are doing that already.
Thank you. Councillor Herkner, do you have another question?
Yes, thank you. And it's also not related to proposed changes, but to the substantive document, if that's okay. And I have two related comments on children. And I was just worrying that children might get penalized for the bad decision making of their parents to some extent, and the children from separated parents, that the arrangements might not facilitate shared custody and children being able to live with both parents. And so the particular places where I have concerns is page 40, children in flats or maisonettes, where point 3873 states that this category will not be awarded for those children who were born when the current accommodation was accepted. So here again, I think it would be in the interest of the children not to be penalized for their parents' decision making if the parents then think better. And then the second place where I wanted to ask about is page 23. In cases where an applicant wishes to include their children in their home options application, this will not be considered where those children have adequate accommodation available to them elsewhere, for example, with another parent. And I just worry about children in with separated parents would then not have the benefit of being able to live with both parents.
I think your second point first. We just haven't got enough accommodation to let somebody have a spare bedroom for half the week. We've got so many families and so many people in need of houses that it's very difficult for us to manage expectations. So that's why we need to have this in policy. So if a child is staying weekends with one parent but lives the rest of the week with another parent, then we wouldn't include that child on both households for purposes of assessing housing need. Because then we're just providing a spare bedroom for most of the week. And we've got enough people who need that bedroom permanently for their household size and maybe overcrowded in difficult circumstances that, you know, again, we're just trying to prioritise those in the greatest need. Yeah, your first point. In your first point, what we're trying to do is avoid a situation where somebody moves into a flat and then approaches us a week later and says, I've got a child in flat, I need to go into a priority band. So it's really about, it is about the adult making the decision for the benefit of the household. People need to take responsibility for their actions is what we're kind of trying to say in that regard.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Champion next and then Councillor Susans.
Thank you. On page 26, qualification for housing in Norwich, and it refers down to that you've got applicants must have been continuously resident in Norwich for at least 2 years. I just want to clarify what we mean by Norwich. Do we mean the boundaries of Norwich City Council, or are we talking about Greater Norwich? If somebody was living in Sproulston, would that disqualify them? It would. And so this is all going to get ripped up when we become a unitary authority. So this has got a very limited timescape, I presume. Yeah? Okay. Just for clarification.
Councillor Jones.
We're very keen that all policies are regularly reviewed. So regardless in housing we're operating, that LGR is happening, but we are continuing business as usual, that we do the same process of things, because actually having things current, particularly with legislative changes, that I wouldn't want to hold back on stuff like that and make sure even for the period we've got up to LGR that things are fit for purpose. Things like that can't be put on hold. We're just carrying on as is, making sure we're working for residents and tenants. So yes, that is happening, but I wouldn't want to hold back just because that's on the horizon.
And presumably in April 2018, the policy immediately brings into scope everyone who's now living in the current boundary of the new unitary authority.
I think that will be a part of the transition to the new council, which is why there's a shadow for a year, because there's got to be discussions. As Chris said, a lot of the housing options policies are similar across the country because so much is dictated by legislation. There may be some slight differences in the neighbouring authorities, but minimal. So that should be relatively straightforward of bringing the I've worked in a council before where we put 2 councils together and we took the 2 housing options policies and wrote them so they're the same, but it does mean your allocation's bigger because you then go to the boundary of the new council.
Thank you. Councillor Susans, please.
Yeah, I have a question about foster care. Now, if you've, as a friend of mine has taken on 3 siblings and she is in council accommodation, not in Norwich. So I just wondered how that works then. If somebody has taken on 3 siblings, of course, they're going to need 3 bedrooms, I assume, for the children because they need their own space. So if they've got that house and then the next children or child that they care for is one, are they penalised? Is it then required that they go down to a 2-bedroom, for instance, if they're only fostering 1 child instead of the 3?
What we say in the policy is that if somebody is fostering or is entering a foster arrangement, as soon as they evidence that, we'll amend their household, the size property they can bid for in accordance with the household at that point. So it might mean their application may change over time. We can only sort of deal with what's in front of us, if you like, and the information we hold. But we do allow for that in policy.
Because it'd be disruptive. They wouldn't want to move every time they get different children to foster. So they wouldn't be penalised at all if they had a larger house but then had 1 child.
No, we can't penalise anybody. We can't penalise anybody who's under occupying. You know, we've got plenty of single clients in 4-bed houses and things like that. You know, there's no way the council can penalise them. That, you know, they've got their tenancy rights and things like that. The only time they come across the home options sort of radar is if they said to us they wanted to move, in which case we'd prioritise their application in accordance with policy to make sure they're expedited into a property that more, you know, that better suited their needs.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Stutley.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could explain which elements of the new policy are driven by legislation and guidance, and excuse me, and those that are more geared to local pressures on housing and supply.
The realistic conversation is one of ours, if you like. The 2-year local connection is statutory guidance. The number of refusals is us, based on local issues. The clarification for rough sleepers is kind of, you haven't got to have it, but the government has just brought out a homelessness strategy which recommends that we have it and is basically giving us the wording for that. So you could say that's statutory guidance, and the Armed Forces Covenant as well, which we're signatory to that, so we've got to do we're an obligation to follow that. So the two that are really unilateral, if you like, are the realistic conversations and a number of refusals.
Thank you. Do I have any more questions at this stage or comments? Councillor Sands.
Just the Ministry of Defence accommodation, someone who's experienced that. If people move out of Ministry of Defence accommodation, is there a direct line then to the council? Is there an agreement with the Ministry of Defence accommodation that they would go directly from that into council accommodation, or would there be a waiting period? Because I know that could be a problem.
What we've done is we've had a sort of publicity drive. It's one of the actions actually of the Norfolk Armed Forces Covenant Board is to publicise how better for veterans and those leaving the services to access services. So we've produced a PDF and a poster and a leaflet, and we've been at various meetings with service users. We go to, I think it's the Nest once a month, to speak to people who are leaving the forces as well, just to explain their options, and if they are leaving the services, how to go about presenting at a local authority, and how we will be able to, in an ideal world, prevent their becoming homeless and prevent any housing crisis, and make sure the transition is as smooth as it can be.
Councillor Galvin.
Thank you. Around I know we've spoken about this before, but around applications and trauma-informed care, to make sure that, whether it's the honest conversation bit or other applications that proceed further, can we be assured that they are informed by trauma-informed care, and that I have had case where residents haven't got very far because they've not been able to complete the process, and then the whole process has sort of stopped, and it's very difficult if you have to go through all your trauma and then you haven't managed to complete the application and then you have to do it all again. It's actually re-traumatizing for people, and in some cases that they give up at that point or find it impossible to carry on. And I've heard that too many times, so I'm just raising it here to hear what part of the policy is that and what part of the process is that. I think it's improved of late, but if we could hear a bit about that.
There are a couple of things that the most obvious thing to say is we have a conversation. What we try not to do is computerize the process too much and have we want to have a conversation with people at the start so they know what to expect, that we can talk them through any issues and have that kind of one-to-one advice at the start of the process. We're trying to humanize the process as much as possible. Equally, we're also part of a trauma-informed practice working group with Homelessness Link, and we're looking specifically at homelessness service. So it's not particularly home options, but it's kind of related, and it's about how we deal with different clients and the different groups' needs and how we meet those. There's an action plan involved in that, and that's progressing fairly well as well. But a lot of that is based on the person-centered approach rather than a mechanized approach. So some of that stuff we're doing already, to be fair.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to check, there's 15 references to the assessment panel within the policy. We don't, however, have any copies or any proper cross-referencing to what that assessment panel will look like, what its procedures are. And it's obviously a key safeguard in a lot of the decisions. It would be really helpful to have some idea of essentially who makes up the assessment panel, how they carry out any decision-making process, and how they act as a check and balance upon the decision makers within the housing team.
It should say in the policy somewhere, I can't quote the number, that the assessment panel is generally made up of a team of managers or team leaders from the service. There's the two-tier way of looking at it, is the reviews of banding, if the banding is being questioned. Then there's medical assessment also. Then there's a medical professional panel, which is made up of partners that we work with in the medical profession, support teams, things like that. So there's a number of tiers to it. Essentially, the assessment panel is a team of managers.
Okay. Unfortunately, and I have checked through the policy in writing and then gone on the website and tried to do a find in case I missed it. Unfortunately, the makeup of the panel and how it operates isn't outlined within the policy. So if it's separate from the policy, it would be good to know, but if not, it would be good to just outline it within the policy so everyone knows how it should operate moving forwards. Thank you.
I will take that on board and go through the policy with a fine-tooth comb tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Are there any other questions that members have? I'm just doing a find for assessment panel at the moment on the PDF.
It might just say panel.
We can follow up with, and we'll share it with for the committee just about the assessment panel. And I think we could also include in there, I think would be useful, wouldn't it? Just to include, obviously there are, rights to look at the decisions the panel makes, and people have got opportunities to, make representation if they're not sort of happy with the response. So there's a governance process around it, and there's a legal process around it. So we can share that with you.
Thank you. Any other questions at this stage? No, thank you. Well, what we're being asked to do here today is note the proposed policy changes and make any recommendations to Cabinet before its approval and adoption of the new home options policy, and that will be happening at February's Cabinet. Councillor Herkler.
Can I suggest a recommendation to Cabinet?
Yeah.
I've typed it out, so I don't know if that's too fast for you, but you slow me down. So I'd like to recommend that Cabinet reconsiders the existing housing options policy to ensure it fully protects the best interests of children, including by considering allowing both the parents to include children in their home options applications in shared custody arrangements, and by considering removing section 3.8.7.3. This category will not be awarded for those children who were born when the current accommodation was accepted.
Okay, thank you. We've got a proposal there. Do we have a seconder for that? Councillor Stutley, I think, was first to second that. And we've heard, obviously, from Chris why that's sort of belief is that that's not practical given the current demands. Councillor, we have a bit of a discussion on that proposal now. Councillor Fulton-McAllister.
Yeah, I just wondered if when we vote on whether to accept or reject, we could do it in two parts, given the two elements of this, because I agree with the second element that essentially the point the child is born shouldn't really impact on the decision, but actually the first element, I don't think we should be stringing people along and giving them false hope about what we can deliver as a council. So I'd be minded to vote against the first element, but in favour of the second. So if we could divide it into two, that'd be helpful.
Thank you. Councillor Galvin.
I wonder if we could have a bit of information if that's an analysis has been done on that. It's been mapped out. Because it's a bit difficult to decide without the impacts being mapped, like a sensitivity map.
Both elements, or
Well,
I think what we've got in our policy is not unusual for councils. It is entirely standard. Most councils do it. I've never worked anywhere that there is a difference. Yeah.
Councillor Jones.
I think, as I've already said, I would love to live in an ideal world where we could offer everyone what the policy, the ideal is for them. So the number of people I've spoken to who want a property with an extra bedroom and they need it, and under even the guidance we have, they should have that. But to prioritise them for a new accommodation actually against someone who has 2 children and 1 bedroom for all of the family, you know, or is homeless, we've got to be realistic. And actually for me it would sit very uncomfortably that I would have a family in temporary accommodation versus someone being housed. We have so many people on the housing register. We have got to be realistic and realistic in the expectations of what we can offer to ensure that as many families and particularly children are housed in suitable accommodation across the city. So I think having a child having access in an ideal world, yes, to a bedroom in both homes would be lovely, but I would rather that every child has access to a bedroom somewhere, and for me that's the starting point there.
Councillor Kendrick.
Yes, I think one always has to realise that for every person you benefit, you penalise someone else. And at the end of the day, you can have a situation where, it could involve 3 or 4 children. And I think it would be, in my own case, when my own marriage split up, I had 3 children. I think it would have been entirely unreasonable for me to expect not only for myself to be housed, which I was in 2011, but to have room for my 3 children as well. I think because at the end of the day, it would have simply penalised someone else who's probably more deserving.
Thank you. Any other comments on that before we put it to the vote? Councillor Oliver.
Thank you. I was wondering how much. I was wondering how much this discussion will inform our house building programme, because very much I agree that obviously there's some limited number of properties, and the council is building more, which is fantastic. But I remember going to see some Housing First properties that were there was some flexibility. So the area just up the stairs was big enough that it could be if a child, say, was staying 1 or 2 nights a week, potentially better than sleeping on the sofa in a living room, for example. So I was wondering if we're giving those kind of things some thought.
Yes, is the short answer. I speak to Andrew a lot whenever there's any development coming up, and we're involved in meetings with Norwich East and with Anglia Square and things like that. We're very mindful of the needs, and sort of also the needs for flexible living arrangements and things like that. And we're always looking at that and what we can do. We know where the pressure points are for us in Norwich, and we're always looking at ways to develop what we need, which may be potentially bedroom tax obviously has changed a lot of what's viable for people these days. So we need to always kind of think about meeting that need and that change in need. So yeah, we're in contact quite regularly.
So I've got Councillor Jones and Davina, and then Andrew.
I think Chris has actually just covered my point around bedroom tax.
Yeah.
So I think we've got to be realistic.
Is that yours point as well, Davina?
People who can't, need discretionary housing payments to meet needs of extra bedrooms. So I think that's another challenge as well. And I'd rather that money was spent on the children, to be honest, as well.
Andrew, did you still want to comment?
I was just going to come on the point about our own housing development kind of ideas as well. We also work in partnership with the local register providers, so such as our Orwell partnership. And we always speak to Chris and team when we're looking at what we're going to design on those sites to see what was going to meet the most housing need. I think it needs to be mindful though that 70% are 1 bedroom on the waiting list or on the register. So that is the greatest housing need. When we talk about family accommodation though, we are looking to work particularly with Orwell to see whether we can build some larger family homes so that we can meet those kind of families that really need those.
And maybe we're sort of jumping ahead of ourselves here, but I'm quite excited personally about the opportunities that would come from a unitary Norwich on extended boundaries with a housing revenue account and the ability to build houses for, effectively build council houses that could be would be then allocated through this policy. And I think there are some options to build on plots of land that aren't currently available to us. And I think, yeah, that potentially ends up being a game changer. Councillor Galvin.
In terms of the amendment, I feel like we haven't got a lot of evidence of how often that would provide impact, or what the demand is there, if you like, to understand how many children that impacts, that they can't that they have to stay on a sofa or whatever through their whole childhood, or if people are co-parenting. So I just wonder if there's something around doing a needs analysis around that. I understand that other councils have that policy as well, but I mean, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try and recognise the needs of children, and increasingly people may co-parent and have children having two homes, and that's kind of, I don't know, it seems that we are going towards that more, but it would be interesting to have the data around that rather than maybe missing out on having adequate child-centred housing policy.
So are you suggesting effectively asking Councillor Herkner to withdraw the current proposal and retweak it so it's around a needs assessment rather than a blunt recommendation for Cabinet to make a change?
I'd be happy for that, yeah.
Okay. So we're looking at you, Alex, now to potentially tweak that wording and then read it back to one that is around asking for it. I mean, I think, as a compromise that could work quite well. It's not asking for a specific change to the policy at the moment, but asking for a little bit of work to be done on whether there is a need for that. Yeah.
And maybe in terms of the exploration of the needs, also how not having a bedroom with the respective other parents affects the relationship children can have with that respective other parent.
Yeah, that's probably outside our data.
That would make a really, really good, interesting piece of work. I'm not sure we would be.
Yeah, outside of our data set, probably.
The only information we'll have on our systems is the current household. So it'd be very difficult for us to do any research on separated households because they don't form part of the system for us. And obviously any of that sort of qualitative stuff, we're a kind of a quantitative based system process.
Well, is there an opportunity to ask that question when people come and use the home options scheme? So collecting data from new applicants, effectively to find out who is is in the position that Councillor Herkner is outlining. We don't have the data at the moment, but we could then start to gather it for new applicants to understand who's not being able to be housed in that way. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but it's difficult, bearing in mind that we take 200 calls a day.
Yeah, okay.
And the team work pretty efficiently and speedily through these applications. So what we try to do is be as lean as we can to make that process for the people on the end of the phone as smooth as possible. So we could, the answer to your question is we could collect it. It'd be a lot of work and the answers might not be that useful.
So I've got almost every hand in the room up at the moment. So I've got Councillors Kendrick, Laws, Herkner and Oliver. So Councillor Kendrick first.
Yes, I think we're launching into the realms of unfeasibility here at the end of the day to ask to gather this information. And also I think you'll end up sort of misleading people that somehow they will be able to get extra accommodation because of this. So I'm afraid I really regretfully have to find this rather unfeasible.
Councillor Laws.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think obviously we'd have to ask the question concern directly, and that may raise expectations that then can't be met. And we do have to be, as Councillor Kendrick has said, regretfully, we have to be practical and realistic about this.
Okay. Councillor Herkner.
I think what I had in mind is the literature search rather than surveying all council tenants. Maybe a recommendation would be to approach UA to see whether there's any researchers or master's students, PhD students who would be interested in exploring this topic further.
Okay, Councillor Oliver.
One suggestion I have, which wouldn't solve the issue entirely, but in a feedback form after the person's been housed, if they, you know, out of a time of crisis, and have the opportunity to give kind of quantitative feedback of their experience and how their housing shapes their lives, kind of more of a case study. I know it's quite hard to get feedback from people, but it could be a thought.
Davina.
I was just having a quick look. I think a lot of the national organisations have done research on these sorts of issues like shelter and Charles Institute Housing and others. And I suspect if we look at some social care work, they might have done it. I do take the point, but whether or not we've got the capacity to do the research in the standard that it would hold up to scrutiny would be concerning. But we could certainly ask our graduate trainee to see if we can do a bit of research to see what is out there in terms of research already, because I suspect there would be some.
I mean, do we need a sort of formal recommendation for that, or could we sort of take that on board and maybe have a sort of brief update at a future scrutiny meeting? Would you be comfortable with that as an initial approach to it? Yeah. We saw some work. Great. I think we've navigated around. Yeah.
Yes, to the second part that doesn't relate to children from separated parents, but that relates to children that were born before accommodation was accepted. And the proposition was to remove that, because the argument being that children shouldn't be penalised for the bad decision making of their parents in the past.
Okay. We've got, yep, and Councillor Stutley seconded that. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, can I just get the paragraph number for that again? Because I didn't quite catch that.
That's 3.8.7.3.
3. 8.7. Yeah. So we do have obviously the two separate ones, Chair. So if it's up to you, it's within your discretion to take them separately.
Well, I think we've had a withdrawal of the first part of that now, so we've now only got one recommendation, which is as covered by 3.8.7.3.
Can I just clarify, if you don't mind? So when you originally read the recommendation out, Councillor Hookner, what I captured was this last part we're talking about was to ask Cabinet to consider removing 3.8.7.3. Is that what this recommendation is? Okay, thank you.
So we've got a proposed and seconded to ask Cabinet to remove 3.8.7.3. If there are no other comments on that, I'll pop that recommendation to the vote. All those in favour of that, please indicate. All those against? Oh, sorry, yeah, might need to just rerun that vote again. Yeah, so the recommendation is to, under 3.8.7, children in flats or maisonettes, to remove the recommendation, remove the paragraph 3.8.7.3. This category will not be awarded for those children who were born when the current accommodation was accepted. I think I don't quite like the language in that paragraph anyway, but Councillor Jones.
Obviously, with that, what that does is impacts whether or not they're a silver band awarded. So this is the issue of how it relates to the higher issue, just for everyone's clarity. Chris, I'm right in that. So basically removing that will mean that, Chris, do you want to explain it? Because it's a double negative there.
At present, if you've got a child under the age of 10 in a flat with no garden, you're in silver band. We don't apply that where somebody has moved in with that child knowing they're not going to have a garden.
Can I make just my case again? So I think in that case, it's just children having to live with the consequences of their parents' bad decision making. I don't think we should try to do what we can to protect children from that. And if parents realize the benefits of having a garden, I think it should be possible for them to reapply for a house with a garden, so that their children can have access to their garden. That's my reasoning here.
Can I just also clarify that once someone is in a property, they could presumably bid. They're not locked into that property, so they could, yeah.
Purely the banding, it doesn't stop them bidding. That's the issue.
Yeah. So they're not locked into that for sort of the lifetime of their tenancy. Councillor Sands.
Perhaps I'm not fully understanding this point, but if someone was in a flat or maisonette, 3rd floor or above, with a child, if they've been there for an appropriate length of time, there's nothing to preclude them from applying for a swap with someone, is there? So, yeah.
Okay, so we're back to Councillor Oliver.
I might have missed this, but just as a point of clarity. So say if somebody's happy to take on a tenancy and they move in, they've got one child and the property doesn't have outside space, garden, whatever. But if they had another child, would that kind of reset things? Because that can influence your decision making, like some people are more in need of outside space.
Yeah, and there would be a change of circumstances, and there's a child born subsequent to that, so the civil ban would be applied in that instance, or if there are other changes of circumstances, medicals, things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Kendrick.
Yes, I mean, I think at the end, I take some disagreement with the idea that somehow it's always some kind of bad decision by the parent. I actually have a friend of mine who took a property. He didn't have a garden, but there was a play park just a few metres away. And as has been said, you know, they had the option later on, especially if their family grows, to try and bid for another property. So I accept that the paragraph isn't perhaps as well written as it should be, but that's a particular point. But I think at the end of the day, the principle behind it is correct.
Thank you. So we have a proposal that's been proposed and seconded that we do need to try and get to a vote on at some point today, hopefully. Councillor, yeah.
No, just to clarify, obviously the process and the policy allows people's life circumstances to change. As Chris has said, people's circumstance, everybody's does. What that does is allow people to have a conversation with the team to say, this is now my family circumstance, and they will talk through what that means and housing options. So mutual exchange, do they need a bigger house? What is it that has changed? So it doesn't lock people in. There is still a choice and a conversation they can have with the team. This just provides the guide as to who is prioritised in what band. And people's life circumstances will mean they'll change bands at different times as well, because of life circumstances. So this isn't, you know, you've had another child, that's it, and there's no change. It does allow a change. This just provides the guide for how people are banded and prioritised, because we have to prioritise.
Thank you. Councillor Fulton McAllister.
Thanks. So I think ultimately none of these decisions are easy, but I think in this situation, we're looking at whether the parent has chosen poorly, and that can happen for a variety of reasons. Ultimately, if you've just had a baby, you're not going to have the same things in mind when you're moving house compared to when they're 5 or when they're 2.5 or however old. And I don't really think that people thinking about their immediate needs should change their banding from future occasions. Either that group of people requires this banding, all circumstances being equal, or they don't. Whether you were not in a brilliant frame of mind, you just had a new baby, which has very different requirements to a child who can run and shout. Ultimately, I don't see the argument of saying, well, they knew what this was going to be like. If they're a first-time parent, they don't know what to expect at future ages. So for that reason, I think I'm inclined to support this. I was listening to arguments both ways, but I just don't see the argument to say if the parent did it with open eyes, especially not knowing what's going to come later on. Nothing can prepare you for these decisions and these experiences, as I've learned recently.
Okay, thank you. So just to sort of remind members, so this is a recommendation that will be asking Cabinet to consider this as an item. So, you know, from that respect, Cabinet will look at it in a couple of weeks' time. But let's pop that to the vote. So the proposal is to remove section 3.8.7.3, or sorry, I should say, ask Cabinet to consider removing section 3.8.7.3 when it considers this report at the next Cabinet meeting. So all those in favour of that, please indicate. All those against? So that is carried. So the Cabinet will be asked to consider that in a few weeks' time. We now need to have a vote on, assuming there's no other recommendations, we need to have a vote on the sort of substantive item and recommend Cabinet to, basically recommend that it goes to, well, start again, James. We're asked to note the proposed policy changes. We've looked at a recommendation to Cabinet. So all those in favour to say we sort of noted those, please indicate. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to officers from Home Options for coming along to assist us today. Okay, so we'll now move on to item 5, which is the housing development at Mile Cross. On my paperwork. This isn't a report which is going to Cabinet. This is something that has come to us because Scrutiny popped it on a topic form. So we've got a combination of Davina, Andrew, and Councillor Jones here. So I guess who would like to speak first? Councillor Jones, do you want to give us a quick introduction?
Yeah, thank you. I suppose Mile Cross has been an interesting process to go through, and it's been a very complex process given the original City Works site had such a level of contamination on it, and the work that's been involved. And it's been fascinating as portfolio holder to witness some of these steps that we've had to go to make even the site fit for purpose, and more recently bringing forward a two-stage process as part of the build. So we've got a fantastic development planned of 67 homes, and we're now, you know, anyone that's driven past Mile Cross will see the massive amount of work going on site. But I think no one should underestimate the amount of work that has gone into getting a site like that, a brownfield, really complex site, fit for purpose. And this is, you know, it's one of several HRA facilitated HRA sites, HRA builds that we are doing ourselves alongside many other things. But I think also important to note, we do acquire other housing, and we are alongside a massive amount of work on understanding our own stock and stock condition at the moment alongside this and capital demands there. We've also as anyone who watched Cabinet last night, agreed to purchase 21 properties at Anglia Square. We also have bought other properties with right to buy receipts. I believe it possibly is 5 at Barrack Street, correct me if I'm wrong, of a new development there. We're always looking for opportunities to add to our housing stock. But yeah, when we're, as the chair has mentioned, we are quite constrained with sites in the city, so they are often complex, and that has been the thing with Mile Cross. Is I don't think you can get a site apart from Anglia Square that is more complex than that. We're now in a place where we've got a lot of work going on in terms of services being put in on site, arterial road on site, and looking at the next stage of the contract, and that is all in process now, with build being planned. So it's exciting times. But obviously more details on that, obviously Andrew will be able to go into far more detail than me.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The paper lays out the history of the site over the previous 5 to 7 years. I think it's fair to say, as Councillor Jones has explained, it is extremely complex. It does have significant ground issues, shall we say. We did the demolition with some funding from One Public Estate, and that then kicked off the idea of us developing the site ourselves in around about 2019, 2020. At that time, we took a paper to Cabinet that gave in a very indicative high-level programme. At that stage, we had no design work. It was literally just, we want to develop this site. And it laid out that there was a potential route to getting homes delivered by 2024. I think it's fair to say that as each stage has gone forward, more and more problems have been found. And so therefore, in order to de-risk the site, various stages have been gone through. So the first stage that was undertaken was to do some design work in around about 2021 and do some further ground investigations on the back of the demolition. That showed that the previous homes that were on Vale Green that had been demolished post-war, sort of 1950s, 1960s, had pretty much just been buried in the ground on the Milecross depot site, and that there was, you know, big chunks of rubble in the ground. There's no way that you would ever develop on that ground without significant remediation. So the team at that time decided to take forward that package of what they called a ground civilization package. That works included pretty much digging up all of the ground on the site down to a depth of circa 2 meters, if not more in some places, taking out all of that rubble. And anyone who went down to site at the time saw these fantastic machines that would take that big chunk of rubble and then condense it down into stockpiles that could be reused in the redevelopment of the site. That whole process took over a year to undertake. So we needed to do that because it de-risked the site for a contractor to then be able to come on and do the development. Without that, they would price in significant amounts that would have cost far more than the actual ground remediation works took to do it ourselves. I think other constraints on the site, it had Japanese knotweed along the Marriott's Way. It's got a huge great water main that goes right across the site. So it goes along the northern boundary and then right across, that feeds the waterworks on Waterworks Road. So you name it, this site has got it. It's got areas of peat that we can't build on. So yeah, huge constraints around the site. So I think the way the team have actually dealt with those constraints by taking it through an incremental process has been absolutely the right way to do it. Brownfield, as Beth alluded to, it's far more tricky than a greenfield site such as Threescore, where you know it's pretty much been a field for 40, 50 years. You can just pretty much crack on and start building. So we do have other sites that will have similar issues to Milecross. So for example, we know Argyle Street has got history of subsidence. So we're going to be doing a similar process on Argyle Street, where we'll be doing some ground civilization works and making the ground stable before we then go out to let a contract. It's about de-risking and it's about managing the costs going forward on sites as to why we've done those. I think just kind of looking through the history of the site, where I've kind of re-explored what's gone on. I think it's also worth reminding people that during this period we've had COVID, we've had issues such as nutrient neutrality, which has significantly hindered progress on development sites across the city. So even if we had managed to submit a planning application earlier, there's no guarantee that we would have been in any better position in terms of being able to take the site forward. I think hopefully that kind of explains a little bit of the history of the site. Since we did the ground civilization works at the end of 2023, early 2024, it has then progressed fairly rapidly in terms of a submission of a planning application in February 2024, approval of that in November 2024, and then a decision being taken to do an early stage enabling package of works, which is the works that are currently on site that commenced in September, which is putting in the roadway, putting in the utilities and putting in the drainage that will serve the entire of the Milecross site. That will de-risk future phases as well. So there is a significant upfront cost in the current phase, but will help benefit for those future phases. What that means is that we've then been able to go out to a contractor on the two-stage process. So whilst that enabling works is going on, we've now got a contractor that's working up stage one, and they've commenced this week, which is what we call a pre-construction services agreement. And effectively what that does is it takes the planning drawings and does all of the technical design work to take that right up to a construction level drawings so that we can then crack on with the site. So that will produce all of the construction drawings. It will also give us a very detailed cost plan. So come the summer, we will have cost certainty where we can go into a fixed contract with that contractor, which is Lovells. I'm really excited that we're going to be working again with Lovells. We had a long partnership with Lovells when I first started at the council through our affordable homes partnership with registered providers. They do deliver excellent quality, so we're really looking forward to kind of seeing what they can deliver on the site. The site was also split into phases, and you'll be aware that we've only got planning approval for phase 1 at the moment, with an indicative layout for future phases. The reason behind that is that Lion Homes were looking at whether they could deliver some open market sale on the site. I think it's fair to say that we want to have a balanced, sustainable community on the site. I think it's worth exploring. When they'd done original work on that, it wasn't viable because of house prices in the area. That was back in 2018. I think it's fair to say that house prices have improved in that locality, and having a mixture of tenures on site could work quite well. This isn't to the exclusion that we will deliver it for 100% social housing in the future. We just want to take the time to look at the options and to present that to members to see what the best way of taking the site forward is. So that options appraisal will be taken forward at the same time as we'll be doing that PCSA work, because we'll have much better idea of costs, and then we can get the idea of whether it's viable to deliver other tenures on the site as well. So that's where we are with the site right now. Come the summer, we'll be starting to build out of the ground and build the homes. So it'd be really exciting opportunities for members to be able to go out, have a look at those sites. I think the design has been very much influenced by the Goldsmith Street design that was award-winning back in the day. So we have a number of flats that bookend terraced houses. It's really helping meet the housing mix that we've met with Chris Hasted to talk about. So as a number of 2, 3 and 4 bedroom houses, along with a significant number of 1 bedroom flats. So it will help to address that need. I think there was a number of questions that were posed by Scrutiny as part of the scoping exercise, and I don't know how you want to work that, Councillor Wright, whether you want to pose those questions or whether members want to kind of reflect on what's been written.
Well, I think members will have obviously had an opportunity to read the report, which I'll just say I found really interesting, because having observed this programme as sort of progressed, you begin to lose track of the timeline and the whys, and it's been really helpful to have that brought together in one document. So thank you for that. But I think what I'd like to do is we'll let members ask questions, and what they'll, rather than do it on a sort of structured basis, we'll see what issues flag up from that. So, I mean, is there anything else you want to say, or shall I put it over to members?
I'm happy to put it across to members. And apologies, I do have a bit of a cold, so if you can use your mic, because I've got a little bit deaf.
So we'll go to Councillor Sands first, Councillor Mike Sands.
Where is it? Paragraph 22 on page, can't see a page number. Talks about 67 of new affordable homes. Is that still the commitment? The first 67 homes will be affordable homes?
Absolutely. The first 67 will all be council homes.
Right, yeah. Second question, if I may. It talks about a Bellmouth entrance to the site. Is that purely for site works access, or will that be for residents afterwards?
That will be the entrance into the site for future residents. So it's got a slightly weird arrangement at the moment, but they'll be reconfiguring that slightly under a small high works agreement, and that will then become the entrance in and out for residents that live on the site.
I can imagine turning right from that site will be quite difficult. So did Highways give any consideration to putting a roundabout there, which would manage the in and out traffic a lot better?
My understanding is not, and you'll have to bear with me because I wasn't involved in the design at the time. It was the housing delivery team, so I'm not as au fait perhaps with the design as I would like to be. But my understanding is that the arrangements will be as they are now, but that there will be a pedestrian crossing at some point along that road, which will hopefully help kind of traffic ease in and out.
I suppose, Councillor Sanson, asked your question. The worst case scenario for someone is that they turn left and go up to the roundabout and then double back on themselves.
That's exactly what I do when I visit
in
site.
certain circumstances in certain locations. So
Yeah, I've got Councillor Fulton McAllister, then Councillor Galvin.
Thanks, Chair. So I just wanted to ask, what precautions are being taken to ensure that there's not delays or disruption due to local government reorganisation?
Mention what you said earlier.
Yes, the government has made it clear, sorry, I should say, you're up for me to answer that one. Sorry. The government has made it clear as part of the transition that spending on the HRA continues. So whilst there'll be rules around what the council can and can't do in terms of the general fund, given the importance of the HRA and running a housing service and continuing doing what we do in terms of bathrooms, kitchens and development, we will be enabled to continue to spend against the HRA.
I suppose I mean more things like during local government reform, we may well have a high turnover of officers, which may mean that we lose some of the institutional knowledge. It may mean silly things happen, like the contract happen. One version of it, the most recent version, may well have been only on one person's computer. And I know you always try to ensure these things don't happen, but sod's law happens. So how are we trying to avoid any unforeseen issues like that? And obviously it's really easy to say, well, we don't know what we don't know.
I'll let Andrew answer on a probably technical point around this particular site, but clearly as part of the transition period, there has to be clear governance, business continuity on all of our systems and issues. And you're right, none of this should be held on one person's computer anyway. So, you know, we've got centralized folders, information is shared, I can access the folder that Andrew can access. So all of the good things that I would expect as part of business continuity should be followed in the meantime. And obviously when it comes to contractual issues, the arrangements is they will novate to whoever the successor council is, so that there should be no problem in terms of contracts. Andrew, did you want to answer this on a particular point?
Yeah, so just to pick on the resourcing issue. So in my team, I was able to successfully secure a new senior development officer who started with me in October after the post being vacant for some time. So we're still seeing the ability to be able to recruit. And in addition, for Milecross and Argyle Street, we've brought in some additional interim resource to ensure that we can drive those forward to meet Councillor Jones's aspirations for the homes being delivered.
Can I just extend my thanks to everyone working on this, because it's really positive to see us continuing to build houses in challenging circumstances and a challenging site.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Galvin, then Councillor Champion, then Councillor Stuteley, then Councillor Kendrick.
Well done. Yeah, thank you for this report. I wanted to ask, obviously, as it's been hatching for a while, that there have been various changes in the wider policy landscape and in the actual landscape around there. So two areas that have changed significantly, I think. One is the actual landscape. So Sweetbriar Marshes has become, instead of like a piece of land that was owned by two family trusts, is now a really significant, nationally significant urban wildlife reserve. It's always been triple SI, but it's really special to the area. It's also on that amazing Marriott's Way, which is the best used cycleway in the east of England, I think. So we've got and obviously the River Wensum nearby, which is internationally important. So you've got you're part of an incredible mosaic there of landscape. So what has that changed about how that development looks out and is knits into that? So that's the one. And the second one is the policy landscape. Obviously, the government's phasing out gas. so that shouldn't really be part of any development now, gas heating, and but also the new home standard mandates solar panels and batteries. Hopefully, we're not sure about the batteries yet, but we're hoping that it's going to mandate batteries and solar, definitely solar on all homes. So just to check what's being planned there in terms of energy use on the site going forward. Thank you.
So in terms of the linkages through to the Marriott's Way, the real positive around this development is it is opening itself up to that Marriott's Way. It's been very much fenced off in recent years. You know, way back when it was a City Works depot, it was fenced off. So there will be kind of connections through to the Marriott's Way, and the opening up, particularly where it goes under the underpass, which is Mile Cross Road, is feels a little bit kind of unsafe. So opening that up and having better visuals across and being overlooked by properties, I think, is a real positive. And hopefully the connections for this new housing, but also the estates to the north, sort of Vale Green and Valpy Avenue, will then have much better connectivity through to the Marriott's Way and be able to enjoy that, and the connections through to the river, as you talked about, Councillor Galvin. So I think this is a real positive for that development. In terms of your second question, I would need to go back and absolutely double check what the energy is, but there is no gas. I can assure you that we've got no gas going in any new developments going forward. From memory, it's air source heat pumps, solar panels, everything that you've just talked about. Battery storage, I'm not sure whether it's included or whether it's future proof, so it can be included. I don't know whether, Beth, you can.
I remember discussions about this because it's something I've asked about, and we were looking, last time I discussed it was looking at it's an ambition, and it's because actually it makes such an impact on people's lives, and we talked about the idea of communal battery storage as an option. At the time when we last looked at it, the costs were significant, but obviously I would have thought have come down quite a lot, so I think it's worth revisiting, and I'm keen to. Because actually it's the way forward. Whether we're at that point right now financially for the cost to stack up in the development versus the rent and the return time, we'll need to have another look at the numbers. But I think it's something we need to keep exploring and looking at how the costs are working in terms of viability of development, but definitely an ambition and something. When we last discussed it wasn't, but we were going to set it up was the idea so that we could put it in future, but I think it's worth revisiting again.
That's exactly my understanding. Yeah. So
thank you. That's if I could just briefly come back, it's really good to hear both on both counts, but take that last one first. Is that I wanted to ask about electric car charging as well being built in, because obviously if people have now, what's changed now is with flexible tariffs, if you have an electric car, a battery, some solar panels and an air source, you're well on the way to having a energy sort of an interoperable smart home that is free energy, and we want to build homes that have that for tenants, don't we? So, and they're proven to be a lot more popular as well, but so it's really good that you're looking at changing that. And the second bit, just to follow up on the Sweetbriar and the connections to Marriott's Way, just to check that there is some landscaping built in to sort of ameliorate those areas as part of a benefit from the site, so that it's landscaped in, and that the Marriott's Way, which did have some landscaping years ago and nice schemes on it, like the mile markers, for instance, they could really do with being regenerated, so that some local regeneration work is linked to the site and how it knits into the landscape would be good to hear.
Well, I think just adding to that, and in particular, how it links into the work that's being done at Slowbottom Park and just the other side.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is work going on Slowbottom Park through the LUF funding as well. So I think there's some real opportunities there to see how that connectivity can work through from Slowbottom Park into the development. Absolutely. In terms of the landscape, I know that it's our landscape team that have designed the landscape for the Marcross Depot site. I know that there are significant SUDS features, for example, and sort of the way that they've looked at that as to whether that can almost act doubly as children's play type areas. So I'll pick that up with our landscape team as to how they're kind of integrating that into the wider area.
Councillor Champion.
Thank you, Chair. It is fascinating, and I've followed this with fascination for a long time. I guess, firstly, I mean, it's fantastic that we're building on brownfield sites, you know, and it's commendable and it should be applauded. And I appreciate the difficulty that these, you know, that presents. Obviously, I've had well, not obviously, but people have approached me in relation to the completion time of this. In North Norwich, people have observed that it was meant to be 2024, and they observed the delay. And in the papers here, one of the things it refers to is Anglia Square, and talking about other brownfield sites. Can we be assured that we're not going to have delays in other brownfield sites, given that this is you know, given what we've observed with this?
You can never say never, because you never know what you're going to find in the ground until you actually get into the ground. But we do have kind of mitigation measures. As I talked about, what we've taken is the learning from Mile Cross into the Argyle Street scheme. We know there that the ground is very, very tricky because it was former chalk workings and former lime kiln works. So what we are doing there is looking at a package of ground stabilisation works. And I think on those brownfield sites, definitely what we're kind of seeing from this is it's worth spending a bit more time up front, de-risking the site, getting the ground into a condition where it's then ready for development. And then you are much more likely to get contractors who are bidding competitively for the work. We know, for example, at Argyle Street, we went out to tender, I think it was in 2024, for a contractor. We went out to 3 or 4 local contractors through a framework. I think only one submitted a bid. And when they were awarded the contract, they subsequently withdrew because they looked at the risk of the ground and decided actually that it was too much of a risk for them. That's why we're now taking that step to de-risk it, so that we can go out and we're more likely to get those smaller, medium enterprise contractors who will then price competitively and then actually build the properties out.
Mr. Jones.
I think it's important to come back to that. It's a complex site, and I wouldn't want to be always being pushing to deliver. Yes, delivery deadlines are important to some extent, but it's also important that we are building on brownfield sites where we can, and that I wouldn't want to avoid complex things that might throw up unforeseen issues to deliver quickly in that sense, because actually these are sites we need to be focusing on which private developers aren't going to pick up. So I'd rather take that risk and make sure we're using those. So there is that uncertainty, and I can live with that, because actually I'd rather that than I was building on greenfield sites. So I think you've always got to weigh up these things. I'll take the uncertainty, and I think it's important that we're on board with that idea as an organisation.
Andrew.
I think the other learning that we've perhaps taken is perhaps to take people on a bit of a journey. So when we are at a very, very early stage and we put an indicative programme out, make sure that people understand it really is indicative. And before you've even put a pen to paper on a design, putting a programme that says you're going to complete by a certain time perhaps isn't the most sensible thing to do. And perhaps we just need to break it down into stages going forward to say this stage will take us from X to Y and will take this long. And then once we've understood the kind of position a bit more, and you know, we've started to use in more recent years the REBA stages far more. So REBA stage 0 and 1 is around kind of concepts, really. It's not about you're going to have certainty that this is what you're going to build. Stage 2, you're then getting into that more detailed. You've selected your option. This is what you're looking to build. Stage 3, you're progressing that further to a planning application. But even between stage 3 and 4, where you're taking planning drawings through to construction level drawings, it's a significant level of work, and it will kind of take a period of time. And depending on the site, it might take shorter or longer. So I think we just need to perhaps promise less, give a bit more on our kind of programs. And I think some of the other discussions that we've had, certainly just meeting with Councillor Galvin and Councillor Wright earlier, is around how we communicate that to not only members, but also to the wider community. And I think with our new website, we've got real opportunities there where we've now started to put major projects onto that website. And I think putting more visual information out on those pages to show this is kind of where we're at, this is what's happening, rather than, you know, people reading through a lengthy report that's a little bit dry. Just giving them a little bit more and more regular updates is probably a way forward, and I'm sure you'd welcome that, Beth.
Yeah, I think, yeah, as we talked about, having that almost that kind of micro site for each major project that, you know, has a visual around the timeline and photos of work as it's ongoing, I think would really offer some confidence to the public that things are happening, even if you can't see those immediately yourself. Councillor Jones.
I think there's an awful lot of things that we're hoping to add that particularly will go on things like Housing Hub, of lots of different things that are longer term processes within housing of development, both stuff that's going on with our existing stock and new build, that I've a lot of ambitions around how we're going to communicate those, about what's the next step of a programme. So different things we've talked about. Okay, it might be a 6-phase programme, but we need to start putting out what's happening over the next 6 months and saying then we'll put out the next bit of information. I hope you've all received my housing updates that give you more information. It's all part of that. It takes time, but it's about making sure we get more out there that people don't have to come looking for it. We're not there yet, but it's definitely something Davina and I both have a lot of ambition around, so we'll continue to share more and more.
Right, thank you. We've got Councillor Stootley next, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As I said earlier, I was involved with Lion Homes for a period of time, and this really was an extraordinary undertaking on this site. It was, and the processes were really fascinating. So I think the other former directors and staff of Lion Homes should be commended for the work that they did and do deliver that site to where it is now, or where it was when they closed. He mentioned earlier about Lion Homes looking at open market on this site, and certainly when I was there, they were asked to look at it, and I know that the directors and myself were committed to 100% social housing there. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Just so my question, I've got 2 questions. I'll just start with this one. Excuse me. The report confirms that phase 1 will deliver 67 homes at 100% social rent, but also states that officers will consider mixed tenure for future phases. And I think this is a question for Councillor Jones. Can you clarify whether the consideration of mixed tenure beyond phase 1 is an officer-led assumption, or whether it has explicit political backing, and at what point members will be asked to formally decide on the tenure strategy for the remainder of the site?
Well, I'll start with the fact that what was going to go on the site wouldn't have been up to Lion Homes, I would say, because it wasn't a Lion Homes site. So it's always been an HRA site. In terms of what tenure is on there, we're taking it one step at a time. I want to build as much social housing as I can in the city. I think we always have to look at each site section by section. So I have to say it's a bigger discussion to look at what the site holds, how it works for the area, what other sites we're working on, because we've got other sites across the city and the HRA has one amount of money to spend. So I want to make sure housing is delivered for the city. I want to deliver as much social housing. Where that is will vary at different times, because there's sites out of Beauthorpe, there's Argyle Street, there's buying stuff at Anglia Square. There is lots of competing priorities and one pot of money. We need to look at actually what is going to work for Mile Cross. I think that's also important. So there's a lot of conversations further down the line. The moment the sole focus is on 67 homes, we're going to deliver those and then start looking at what happens next. So I haven't made any commitments either way, in terms of I want as much social housing as is viable and the HRA can afford. And I think anyone who's read the HRA business plan will look at the amount of capital we have and the amount of capital it will take for our homes to get them net zero. You know, this is significant sums of money for our existing stock that we need to spend. And that is our tenants' money. And that is always my first commitment. That money belongs to our existing tenants. It's about upgrading their homes. We've done stock condition surveys of 78%, I believe now, of our stock. So we know a lot of the needs of those homes. And I've got to make sure those tenants live in the best homes. That takes a lot of capital. So we've got to balance all those competing demands so that all of that comes into a lot bigger conversation than just Mile Cross site. So I'm afraid that's not an absolute answer, but I suppose it's saying, we've got to look at the big picture. Please look at the HRA business plan. It shows that significant need for capital investment to do the net zero work on our stock, which I think we can all agree is a really crucial, and EPC work. We have to do that as well. So we've got those competing demands. We will always look at what money comes from central government, and that will be exciting opportunities, but we've got to do it on a case by case so it works for the HRA, is affordable, and works for our existing tenants as well, because I would never disadvantage them when I'm making decisions about building homes. So yeah, I'm afraid that doesn't give you an absolute, but it tells you where my position is.
If I could just add to what Beth has just said there, obviously the new social and affordable homes programme has been released by Homes England. For the first time, we will be able to mix and match right to buy receipts with that central government grant. So we are just exploring whether that will give us an opportunity to put additional capacity into the HRA that might enable us to do more homes. But we just need to work that through with colleagues at Homes England to see what the opportunity might be.
Thank you. Councillor Kendrick, I think you were next.
Yes, I think one should make quite clear how difficult this site was to develop. I mean, obviously it was highly contaminated by the Mile Cross development in the first place. I mean, if you want, so it's not a surprise that the delivery date has slipped because it is a brownfield site. I mean, if you want a site which is going to, you can be pretty certain it will go to schedule, then build one on a greenfield site, you know, on flat, dry land, you know, which of course the private sector does. They wouldn't touch a place like this. As a friend of mine who's much more into geology once said, I once said to him, "Isn't it lovely? We've got these lovely walks along the River Wensum." And to which he pointed out, well, that's because at the end of the day, it was difficult to develop housing on in the 19th century, the interwar period, and the 1950s and 60s when there was a great house building program. So they said, oh, well, perhaps the council like to get over as parkland, and that's a little walkie instead. So I think it was intrinsically difficult. I mean, before the 19th century, when the Wensum and other rivers were canalised, a lot of that area was swampy, so it's hardly a surprise there's a great deal of peat there. And of course, as anyone will know, peat is a difficult substance to build upon, so that's not a surprise at all. So I'm not at all surprised that there was some slippage in development. I think that was inevitable and must always be taken into consideration when you're going to develop on a brownfield site.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
I'm a bit of a geology geek. Got a bit of a question just off the back of that question. I had overlooked the idea that there's peat on the site. Have we dug out all the peat?
It's not kind of really active live peat, for want of a better word, but there is a strip which just makes it a little bit more difficult, and it's adjacent to the Marriott's Way. Okay. That's the area where we're going to be looking to do our kind of attenuation and our SUDS kind of strategy. So that's what we'll be using that kind of area for.
Okay, can I follow up? Sorry, my actual question. Previously, I know that the county council, when this a few years ago, they objected because they didn't believe there was acceptable flood risk and drainage strategy. Has that all been alleviated in relation to SUDS? Has this all been alleviated? Is the elevation of the properties going to be significant that it then can alleviate that?
Yeah, so that's been signed off as part of the drainage strategy through the planning system. The lead local flood authority has approved the designs.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stuteley.
Thank you, Chair. The report, paragraph 32, says that since 2020 there's been 1,008 new houses completed in the city, of which 291 are affordable. Of these, 262 have been enabled or delivered by the council through direct delivery, provision of land, or grants of right to buy receipts. So does that really mean that only 29 affordable units have been delivered by private developers?
Sorry, I can't hear Ian. Apologies.
Okay, no, sorry, I'll start again. 262 of 291 have been enabled or delivered through the council. So does that mean that only 29 have been delivered through private delivery?
Correct.
So less than 3%.
And I think actually those 29 were a scheme that was an affordable housing provider that didn't need any grant or fund or land from us. So I think very little has actually been delivered through the kind of planning process, for want of a better word. We have provided grants of right to buy receipts to some that were through the Section 106 system, and that's perfectly allowable through government. So the example I can think of there was the Bluebell Road, McCarthy and Stone development, where we gave a grant to Norwich Housing Society to take the affordable units there. Councillor Wright, you'll know that well, being in your ward. And we also gave a grant to Broadland for their Canary Quay on the units that were required through Section 106. They still needed a little bit of help to make that viable. So the planning system is actually delivering very little affordable housing in the city, and it's an issue that we're trying to kind of grapple with generally in planning, where we get schemes coming forward with zero or very low levels of affordable housing, just because of general viability in the area. So we are responsible for the vast majority of the affordable housing, either direct delivery on sites such as Threescore that we've delivered in the past, or by working with our partners such as Orwell and bringing forward sites on our own land.
Thank you. Just follow up that. It's fascinating, and it's a real concern, isn't it? But I think there's another it is another reason actually why local government reorganisation may give us some additional potential, because evidently outside of the city it seems to be more viable to produce
generally because it's more greenfield developments. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or comments at this stage? Councillor Stutley.
I'd like, going back to the tenure for this site, I'd like to recommend that the decision making on the tenure for that comes back to scrutiny for our view. So that we can
pre-scrutiny,
so that we can provide a scrutiny view of that decision to.
We often pre-scrutinise things anyway.
Can I just clarify? Do you mean phase one, as in the ones we're talking?
No,
about?
in future phases.
Yeah, phases. Okay.
So subsequent phases come to scrutiny for pre-scrutiny. That's fairly within the sort of standard.
They will be subject to a cabinet decision anyway.
Yeah.
So scrutiny would have the ability to.
Yeah. So we could have can we have a seconder for that? I think Councillor Hoekner was there first. So we've got a proposal that scrutiny would pre-scrutinise subsequent cabinet decisions around subsequent phases. You'll tidy the wording up a bit on that, but yeah, the general sort of principle there, and I suspect members would be quite happy with that. So let's have a vote on that. All members who would like to pre-scrutinise the subsequent phases. Sorry? Yeah. Well, yes.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, actually, with my shorthand, I just said there, pre-scrutinise the subsequent phases. I think probably actually sums it up quite well. So, was anyone against that? Great. Thank you very much. So, are there any other proposals or recommendations that have come out of today? Councillor Galvin.
To commend to cabinet that there's no gas on the site at all, and that the air source heat pumps are there. So and ask that batteries are looked at being added, and solar, depending on whether solar's on or not already. And that, okay, so commend that solar's there, ask that battery storage is added, and that electric car charging is added as standard. And that the site includes, I know you said this is happening, but that the site definitely includes Marriott's Way sort of amelioration work, and work with local community groups to build in opportunities for their input in that in some way. I'm just keen. This may be happening anyway, so maybe it doesn't need to be a recommendation, but I'm aware of all the great work going on with Green Hearts in Marcross, and they're just one of the groups that are really part of that. So it's really how to build in community from the very beginning. And I'm wondering about the hoardings, whether I know you've got plans for the hoardings, but whether things like the Marriott's Way, the River Wensum, the clean heat, energy efficient development, and the community engagement can be very much part of those hoardings going forward, perhaps giving those groups a chance to showcase what they do as well, and that be brought forward. I know that's imminent, but
so very, very keen to encourage as much community engagement as throughout the whole process of the building and beyond. And I think I've been having conversations with comms about how we make that meaningful engagement with the Marcross community, that it's not just any particular one group, that it reaches far further, because there's a big community around that site. And then also some of the decisions about the site, discussions I had maybe a year or two ago around, there'll be certain decisions on site that we can hold back a little till people move in, because actually they need to be owned by the people that live there as well. So what we use certain spaces for, maybe in terms of what type of things we have in a play area, things like that, needs to be influenced by the people who are in that community. So there needs to be a series of engagement that we're going to be working through. And I've been having a conversation with comms already about that, because actually it's about, this is part of a wider community, but also the community itself and how we make that work meaningfully.
I think just to come in on that, I think one of the learning experiences I picked up from Goldsmith Street is the informal play areas worked really well, but the formal play area didn't. And I think that was because we prescribed it and it wasn't what the local community wanted. So I think Beth's absolutely right that there's this central play area that links the Vale Green area into the site. I think there's a real opportunity there to engage with both the existing and the new community around what that space looks like. So we've got some indicative designs from our landscape team that have been approved by planning, but there's nothing to stop us doing that community engagement and rejigging those ideas.
And it's
a great idea.
It's like with any new development where you end up seeing the desire paths that users have put in to say, actually, this is where we wanted to walk, not where you wanted to tell us to walk. And so I think there's a lot of sense in holding some stuff back.
Also the engagement work around naming the streets, obviously, because for anyone who was around, who's been there when Common Lot have sung their amazing piece about how we need to name things after women, which I fully support, and it's an amazing piece of work. We've got some ongoing engagement around that, and then how we will select those names going forward needs to be an engagement process as well, so that they are owned by the community as well. But it's a really important opportunity to celebrate women of Norwich.
So we sort of had 3 recommendations probably nestled away in there. So one around commending Cabinet for not having gas, for having solar panels, and encouraging air source heat pumps and electric charging.
Not having air source heat pumps.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but storage and EV charging. So
yeah, battery storage and EV charging. So that's sort of one recommendation. Then there was one around I guess comms and overall engagement. What wording have you got on that, Alex?
For community engagement to be part of the hoardings. That's what I've got.
I think the hoardings was a third one.
Third one.
Yeah.
The second one I've got is actually about the site, including the Marriott's Way.
Oh yeah.
That tie into the community part.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. The site work, including Marriott's Way amelioration works. That's a very broad way of putting it, but just to make sure that, yeah, we probably need more information on that, because it probably is happening anyway. But
yeah, so just to flag, I think I mentioned earlier, the Marriott's Way is owned by county. So there will need to be kind of liaison with county at the moment. Obviously under LGR, that all comes under one kind of area, and the planning permission's already been approved for what the linkage through to Marriott's Way is for the current scheme. but there might be opportunities in the wider redevelopment of the remainder.
So could I suggest liaise with counties to identify wider opportunity, liaise with county and local community user groups to identify wider opportunities for amelioration of Marriott's Way as part of the development? Yeah, contemporary with the development. Yeah. Did you get that?
Yeah. And then there's also one around communication and engagement. Councillor Sands.
In relation to that, I mean, I'm not objecting to it. I was like a little bit of clarification. Should we go ahead with Norwich on extended boundaries, which seems highly likely, and county council will disappear entirely, then where does the ownership of Marriott's Way, at least various sections, then lie? Will that come to? Whoops.
Okay, so we've got three recommendations. They haven't been seconded yet, so I'll happily second those. Take them all on block if people are happy with that. So all those in favour, please indicate. Unanimous. Thank you very much. Anything else on this item before we move on to? Thank you very much for coming along. So we're now moving on to item 6, which is nutrient neutrality review scope. So in May 2025, the Audit Committee resolved to request that the Scrutiny Committee considers reviewing the current position around nutrient neutrality and the mitigations. At the June 2025 work programming session, the Scrutiny Committee added nutrient neutrality to the work programme for March 2026, with the caveat that we needed to understand more about what the Audit Committee wanted us to review and to scope the topic out to ensure the Scrutiny Committee can add value. The relevant minutes of the Audit Committee meeting are in the agenda pack, as well as the Scrutiny topic form, which we use to scope out topics for review. So basically today, can we go through the form, and Alex will complete it on our behalf. The form will then go to officers who can start preparing a report for our March meeting. Just to be very clear, we're not debating nutrient neutrality today. We're here to identify what we want to know in March and what the key issues are. I think one of the challenges is I'm on the Audit Committee, but had to send apologies for that meeting. So I'm not actually sure still really what detail, but I think we can perhaps have some understanding of some of the issues we might want to think about regarding nutrient neutrality. How much of a shock it came to the council. We obviously attempt to do some credits thing ourselves and have now joined another partnership. So are there lessons to be learned around that and other things? So that's my sort of starters for 10. Councillor Sands.
I don't know whether this comes within the scope of this topic or not, but had Anglia Water invested in infrastructure instead of paying shareholders with enormous sums of money, as all water companies seem to have done, I don't think we would have been in the position of having to discuss the whole concept of nutrient neutrality, because it would have been dealt with. And one of the things I did ask in audit is there provision, should Norwich be awarded extended boundaries, of then providing some small scale city-based, or authority-based water treatment works to provide extra capacity that Anglia Water clearly won't provide until sometime down the track. As I said, I don't know whether that's an idea or a concept comes under the remit of this topic,
but I think it's
at least will be noted.
I think it's reasonable to look at what the options might be for other sort of potential mitigations with a change, and maybe also to look at the impact that the water company has had on getting us to the situation where we are today. Because I think we need to understand everything about it. So Councillor Fulton McAllister, then Councillors Galvin, Champion, and Hoekner.
So I think it would be helpful if within the scope of this we were looking at how effective the nutrient neutrality regulations brought in by Natural England were, why they didn't consider any further provisions. For example, I know that there's significant environmental pollution from farms and agriculture, which had, from what I recall, 0 restrictions imposed upon them. And ultimately, it feels like, and I'm not a great supporter of housing developers, but it does feel like the easy option was to say no more building, which meant that ultimately it choked up the housing supply for ordinary people. Ultimately, I'd like to get to the bottom of what powers they actually had. I don't know what powers they had, whether there was more that could be done by Natural England and the Environment Agency in regulation around agricultural runoff, which, from my understanding, pollutes significantly more than those new developments potentially would have. And perhaps looking at, given we will have expanded boundaries with a new council, essentially what powers are available to the council, while acknowledging we don't currently have those expanded boundaries, but what powers are available for us to ensure that we don't get to a position similar to what was imposed upon us and we are having to find ways to work around. So those would be the aspects I'd be particularly interested in.
Thank you. Councillor Galvin.
Thanks. I think it was based on a legal ruling, wasn't it? So it gave a power that isn't available in other sectors. That's where we got nutrient neutrality from. So it was, that's what happened so suddenly. Yeah. Yeah, that might be the recommendation, really, just to explain why nutrient neutrality happened like it did. I mean, it was a good thing it happened, no mistake about that. It had to happen, but it happened rather suddenly, and it's because the power came from that legal ruling. The interested in the effectiveness of mitigation strategies and what we're using. So what the key mitigation that Norwich has. I know we're kind of buying into other credit schemes. I mean, I don't know how much we want to go into it, but we did have a bit of a, I think we've talked about it before, and I don't know what merit there is in exploring it much further, but it sounds like we had rather a failed strategy that we then went to another one. Yeah.
I think with my sort of opening remarks, I'm kind of interested in understanding the relationship between the two credit schemes. The one we started to do ourselves, and then we moved on to a sort of more joint one. So
how we work with other authorities and why we didn't to start with would be a useful thing to look at, I think.
Robert, did you?
I'm afraid, Chair, mine is the dreaded 2-hour mark point. I'm just saying, so we only have one other item. So obviously it's up to the committee whether they wish to take the work programme. If you wish to take that now and then continue your discussion, then I would suggest that's probably the easiest way of just moving forward.
Well, in the back of my mind, I was sort of thinking that we probably look at about 10 minutes max on this, so maybe we could just canter through anyway and just sort of get to the end of it.
We just need to go from. Just need to have a quick show of hands on that.
Yeah, everyone happy just to get to the end of this? Yeah, great, thank you.
So the other point I wanted to raise was environmental monitoring of the impacts of it on the river. So what kind of monitoring is done? This was particularly brought in because of the River Wensum. So the impacts of environmental monitoring and what monitoring is done. I think we could usefully have a briefing on that and the levels that are reflected in that monitoring, i.e. the state of the river. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Champion.
Thank you, Chair. On Tuesday, we had an SDP meeting where it was referring to the SSSIs having decreased in their favourability, which includes the Wensum, which I assume is the area that document was pertaining to. Although I did ask about it at the time, there was very little information. I think I would be very interested to understand what impact nutrients are having on the Wensum. I'd also like to ensure that members are educated in relation to what has happened in the rural areas, because ever since this came into being, the argument from the urban area has been that it's the rural areas that haven't done their bit and that, you know, it's unfair. So I think there needs to be some education. I'd also like to know why Norwich was caught unawares, because this had already happened in the south, on the Solent, and in the south of England, where the chalk rivers are similar. And so precedent had been set, and when it happened, I was genuinely surprised. I was quite fresh and behind the ears. I hadn't been here very long, but I was surprised that the council was surprised, because there had been precedent set, and if you look at the chalk barrier going across the country, it seemed very obvious that we would be next. And so when it comes to environmental legislation, I think, are we looking ahead at what can happen? You know, are there other legislations similar to nutrient neutrality, which could be, you know, sort of rolling along? And there might be precedent set that, you know, have we got anyone looking at anything like that? Because I remember at the time that once it's very easy in retrospect to look back at something and go, oh, well, that was obvious. But I do think all the signs were there. So I would be curious to know what preparations we have for equivalent mitigations of other things moving forward, and how we're, you know, anticipating those. And I'd also like to know what impact in relation to the River Wensum as an SSSI that nutrient neutrality has had to protect it. Have we actually improved, you know, the nutrient runoff going, you know, or neutralized it? We haven't improved it. We're never planning to improve it. We're just going to sort of, you know, if any of that makes sense. I don't know. That's sort of,
yeah.
It's a topic I could rant about, but I won't. I'll hold my tongue.
Thank you. Councillor Hoekner? Oh, no. Yeah, Councillor Stitley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think there was an SDP meeting where where a report came specifically on this. So it might be useful to look that up, because it could help to inform the committee on this subject going forward. I have something written down which I think might be I'd like to put forward as a proposal for examination, and that is of whether nutrient credit schemes represent value for money for the public, including who captures the financial benefit, whether credits crowd out or fail to compensate for direct environmental improvement on site, essentially, and whether public land or public funds are being used optimally.
Thank you. So, Councillor Sands.
Just want to address, if I may, to put some minds, perhaps partly.
Yeah, I think just given the time, obviously we're not litigating the.
No, this is just a technical thing.
It's just things that might go into the report. So if it's something that Alex might put in the scope,
will, because in terms of runoff from agricultural areas, farmers are now using highly complex computer-controlled booms and things to put stuff on the land. We know that whatever goes on is money that's they spent. If it runs off, that's money wasted. What they're now doing is adopting technologies that minimises what goes on to the land. So in the longer term, I think we'll find that runoff from agricultural areas will be greatly diminished.
So I think there's a broader theme to understand the relationship between urban and rural when it comes to this. Alex, I think by the sort of fury with which you've been typing, I think you've probably got quite a lot to go into that. So thank you very much. I think we've got that well scoped out. We have now reached the 2-hour mark, so we'll close the meeting. I will make one sort of quick sort of house notice, which is to commend the scrutiny budget training to you, which you should have in your diaries already. Councillor Hoekner.
I have one request for an addition. Permissible?
Yep, very quickly.
That would be to hear back from the task and finish group on deliberative democracy and any interim recommendations,
Okay.
whether they could come to the
Yeah,
March meeting.
we can, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
find, yeah.
And then I would like to ask the committee to wish Rob well on his honeymoon. It's upcoming.
Enjoy. Great. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.